Julie walked into my garage with her chin held high, looking like she was in complete control. She didn't bother to hesitate before announcing, "I sold your car collection. It's for a family emergency. The buyer will be here tomorrow." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the rows of shining cars that surrounded me. Each one was more than just a vehicle. They were treasures I had spent years restoring, polishing, and protecting. There was my 1971 Mustang Fastback, sleek and powerful. Next to it sat a 1966 Corvette split window, a beauty that could stop people in their tracks. Then there was the 1973 Dodge Challenger, bold and strong. And finally, the car I loved most, my 1968 Shelby Cobra, the crown jewel of my collection. Every one of these cars carried a piece of me. I had spent late nights in this very garage, hands stained with grease, sweat dripping down my face, determined to bring each one back to life. These weren't just machines made of metal and chrome. They held memories, sacrifices, and stories that went far beyond money. My name is Jacqueline Scott. I'm 37 years old, and over the years, I managed to build one of the finest private car collections in the entire state. People knew me for it. What Julie, my mother-in-law, didn't realize was that these cars weren't just expensive toys I kept for fun. They were my livelihood. I invested in them, restored them, and their value kept my business alive. But Julie stood there with a look of pride on her face. "The family needs the money," she said, as if she was doing something noble. "Harold's business is struggling, and as his mother, I had to do something." Harold was my husband's brother. He had a reputation for failed business ventures, poor choices, and reckless spending. Everyone knew he wasn't good with money, but Julie always rushed to save him from the consequences of his mistakes. And now, she had dragged me into it without my permission. I walked slowly to the Mustang and ran my hand across its hood, feeling the cool metal under my fingertips. "How much did you sell them for?" I asked in a calm voice. Her smile grew wider. $10,000 for all four. The buyer thinks he's getting a bargain, but it's enough to save Harold's business." Inside, I almost laughed. 10,000? My collection was worth more than $4 million. She had sold them for a fraction of their real value. But I didn't let my amusement show.
"Not yet."
"That's wonderful," I said instead. My tone was light, almost cheerful. I watched her face carefully. She had expected me to scream, cry, or throw her out. But instead, I was agreeing with her. Julie hesitated, suddenly unsure. "Well, yes that is," she replied. "The buyer will be here at noon tomorrow. I'll need the keys and the paperwork." I nodded, walking toward my workbench where I kept the documents. "Of course. Family first, right?" Her smile returned, full of triumph. She thought she had won. But I knew something she didn't. And by tomorrow, she would learn the truth. "I knew you'd understand once you thought about it," Julie had told me earlier, her voice full of confidence. "After all, these cars just sit here most of the time. At least now they'll serve a purpose." If only she knew how many purposes they had already served. That evening, long after she had left my garage, I sat in my home office staring at the quiet glow of my desk lamp. The room smelled faintly of old books and engine oil, a mix that always reminded me of who I was and what I loved. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hey Gabriel, it's Jacqueline. Remember that offer you made last month? Is it still open?" Gabriel Macht was the curator of the National Automobile Museum. For months, he had been trying to convince me to sell my collection to them for their upcoming vintage racing exhibit. His offer had been more than fair. Not only had he promised a generous payment, but he had also offered me a permanent position at the museum as their head restoration specialist. "Jacqueline." Gabriel's warm voice came through the line. "Of course the offer still stands. Having your collection and your expertise would be invaluable to us." I leaned back in my chair and smiled, imagining the look on Julie's face the next day. "Good," I said softly, "because I have a story you're going to love." What Julie didn't know was simple. She had no right to sell my cars. Each of those vehicles was already under contract with the museum. The papers had been signed just last week. Technically, the cars already belonged to the museum, but the agreement allowed me to keep them in my garage until the exhibit officially opened. That meant Julie's so-called sale was not only invalid, but could legally be considered fraud. I could have stopped her the moment she bragged about what she had done. I could have pulled out the contracts, shoved them in her face, and ended her scheme instantly. But the truth was, years of her meddling had taught me patience. Years of watching her choose Harold, her golden child, over everyone else. Years of hearing her dismiss my passion for cars as a silly hobby. No, this time I wasn't going to interrupt. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone walk straight into their own trap. The next morning, I stood in my garage, the keys and paperwork neatly prepared. Right on time, Julie arrived, her son Harold close behind. With them was a man in a sharp suit whom I quickly guessed was their buyer. "Jacqueline, this is Mr. Jeremy," Julie said, glowing with pride. "He's very excited about the collection." "I bet he is," I replied, watching as Mr. Jeremy circled the Shelby Cobra, his eyes wide with admiration. "These are absolutely stunning," he said eagerly, reaching for the keys in my hand. "The paperwork's all ready," I told him, smiling as I passed over not the ownership documents Julie expected, but copies of the museum contracts. "Everything's right here." I watched Mr. Jeremy carefully. At first his face showed pure excitement as he flipped through the documents I had handed him. Then his brows pulled together in confusion. Finally, his eyes widened in shock. Julie, who had been standing proudly behind him, noticed the sudden change. She hurried forward, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. "What's wrong?" she demanded, leaning over his shoulder. "What are those papers?" Mr. Jeremy's voice was calm but uneasy as he spoke. "These cars," he said slowly, "appear to already be the property of the National Automobile Museum. Any private sale would be illegal." The color drained from Julie's face. For once, she looked completely lost. "That's impossible," she stammered, turning to me. "Jacqueline, what is this?" "This," I replied, pulling my phone from my pocket and opening the camera, "is what happens when you try to sell something that doesn't belong to you." I started recording, wanting to capture every second of their reactions. Harold, her son, had been quiet until now. He began inching toward the door, his face pale, his shoulders tense. But I wasn't about to let him slip away. I had worked too hard on this moment. The best part of my plan hadn't even started yet. Julie's voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. But these are just cars," she sputtered. Her perfectly manicured hands shook as she gripped the museum contracts. "You can't possibly mean this. It must be some kind of joke." I walked slowly over to the Corvette and let my hand glide along the smooth chrome trim. The shine of the metal reflected the garage lights, a reminder of years of work. "Actually, Julie," I said evenly, "this joke is worth about $4 million. And that's before we even start talking about federal charges for attempting to sell property that belongs to a museum." Mr. Jeremy had been busy tapping on his phone, his fingers moving quickly. He cleared his throat nervously. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Perhaps I should leave." "Please stay," I said calmly, lifting my eyes to meet his. "The museum's legal team will want to hear from you directly about your involvement in this attempted fraud." Harold froze in his tracks. His voice shook when he spoke. "Legal team?" "Oh yes," I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face. I pulled up the security camera feed on my phone and held it up so they could see. "They're especially interested in last Saturday's footage. You know, the one where you and Julie brought a locksmith here to make copies of my garage keys. Tampering with museum property is a very serious crime." Julie's face, already pale, turned bright red with anger. "You set us up," she shouted. "You knew we were only trying to help Harold, and you laid a trap." I shook my head slowly.
"No, Julie."
"You set yourself up. All I did was let you walk straight into your own mistake." "I gave you plenty of chances," I said, my voice calm but firm. "All you had to do was ask about the cars, or at least show some respect for what I do. Instead, you broke into my garage, arranged an illegal sale, and tried to steal the work I've built my entire life. And for what? to bail out Harold's fifth failed business venture. The garage went silent. My words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Then, in the distance, the low sound of engines broke the silence. Everyone turned to the windows. 3 cars were pulling up outside. Through the glass, I recognized them immediately. One belonged to Gabriel Macht from the museum. Another was my lawyer, Amber Heard. The third was a black and white police cruiser. You called the police? Harold whimpered, his voice shaky. He looked more like a frightened child than a grown man in his 40s. Actually, that was me, Mr. Jeremy spoke up, stepping away from the cars. His voice was calm, but carried weight. I'm not really a buyer. I'm an investigator with the Insurance Crime Bureau. We've been monitoring your suspicious business dealings for months, Mr. Scott. Julie gasped and stumbled backward, her hand catching the edge of the Mustang for balance. Her usually perfect posture collapsed under the truth. This can't be happening, she whispered. We're family. Family? I let out a laugh, but it was bitter and cold. Was it family when you told everyone my restoration work was just a silly hobby? Was it family when you convinced Peter to call off our wedding because you thought I wasn't good enough for your precious son? Thank God he had the courage to stand up to you. You only think about control, Julie. You've never thought about family. The garage doors opened and Gabriel Macht stepped inside first. His eyes went immediately to the cars, scanning each one like a parent checking on their children. Amber followed behind him, holding her tablet, and then 3 police officers entered, their presence making the air feel heavier. They're fine, Gabriel, I said before he could even ask. Though they tried to sell the whole collection for $100,000. Gabriel's head snapped toward Julie, his eyebrows shooting up. 100? Do they even realize the Cobra alone is worth more than that? Apparently not, I replied, watching as the officers began spreading out, taking statements from everyone. Harold sat pale and sweating under one officer's questioning while Julie shrank into the corner, clutching her bag like it could shield her from what was happening. They also didn't know, I continued, about the restoration business I run, or the museum contracts, or the fact these cars have been featured in major automotive magazines. Amber walked over and tapped her tablet. We have everything we need, Jacqueline. Security footage, the fake sale agreement Julie prepared, even text messages between them planning the whole thing. Do you want to press charges? I turned slowly to look at Julie. She was now sitting on my work stool, her head buried in her hands. Harold, meanwhile, was being pressed harder by the officers, forced to explain his failed ventures and suspicious money trails. For a moment, I just stood there, weighing everything. For a brief moment, I felt a small twinge of pity. Julie and Harold had been so sure of themselves, so convinced that their needs were more important than anyone else's. They thought they were untouchable. But enough was enough. Yes, I said firmly, turning to Amber. File everything. It's time they learned that actions have consequences. Before anyone could respond, the garage door swung open. My husband Peter rushed in, still in his work clothes, his tie loosened as if he had driven straight from the office. I had texted him earlier, telling him what was happening. Now his eyes scanned the room, taking in the police officers, the museum staff, and finally landing on his mother and brother. Really? His voice was low but filled with disappointment. After everything, you still couldn't just leave her alone? Julie lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice cracking. Peter, honey, we did it for Harold. For the family. Stop. Peter cut her off sharply. Just stop. You didn't do this for the family. You did it because you've never accepted that Jacqueline is part of this family. You can't stand that she's successful at something you don't understand. The truth in his words hung heavy in the air. Julie's mouth opened as if to argue, but nothing came out. Harold stared at the floor, unable to meet his brother's eyes. Peter walked over to me, slipping an arm around my shoulders. His touch was steady, reassuring. Well, now you'll have to understand what she does, he said to them. Because tomorrow, the museum's press release goes out announcing their new collection and their new head of restoration. The look on Julie's face was priceless. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in disbelief. Head restoration specialist? She whispered. That's right. Gabriel mocked added from behind her, his tone professional but edged with pride. Jacqueline's reputation in the classic car world is exceptional. We've been trying to bring her on board for months. Now the world will know exactly how talented she is. 3 police officers stepped forward and guided Julie and Harold toward the door. They were being taken out to discuss the charges and their role in the attempted fraud. Watching them leave, I felt a weight slide from my shoulders. Years of dismissal, of snide remarks, of backhanded compliments, all of it was finally coming to an end. Peter gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You okay?" I looked around at the cars, my cars. They gleamed in the garage light, but now they were also part of something bigger than Julie's narrow vision. They were part of history, part of a museum, part of a legacy. "Yes," I said softly, smiling. "I really am." For months later, I stood in the grand exhibition hall of the National Automobile Museum. Visitors strolled past my collection, stopping to admire the cars under perfect lighting. Each vehicle had its own plaque, carefully detailing its history and restoration journey. My favorite, of course, was the one beside the Shelby Cobra. The sign read, "Restored by Jacqueline Scott, Head of Restoration Services." Every time I saw it, I thought back to the look on Julie's face in my garage. That memory reminded me of how far I'd come and how sweet justice can be. When Julie finally understood what her little scheme had cost her, it was already too late. The fraud charges had landed hard, hitting both her and Harold. Harold, with his long trail of shady business deals, faced serious legal trouble. Julie, on the other hand, didn't end up in jail, but her reputation in her precious social circles was destroyed. The newspapers loved the story, printing headlines like, "Mother-in-law's classic car heist backfires." The humiliation alone was a punishment she could never escape. Meanwhile, my life had taken a very different turn. "There's my star curator," Gabriel mocked called out as he entered the exhibition hall with a group of men and women in expensive suits. "Jacqueline, I'd like you to meet some board members from other automotive museums. They're very interested in your restoration techniques." I smiled warmly as he introduced me. We chatted about paint matching, engine rebuilds, and the delicate process of sourcing rare parts. I could see the genuine respect in their eyes, and it felt good. No, it felt right. As I explained a detail about the Corvette's restoration, movement near the entrance caught my eye. Standing just inside the doors was a familiar figure, watching quietly. My father-in-law, Nathan. Unlike Julie, Nathan had played no part in the attempted theft. And from what Peter told me, the whole ordeal had forced him to face some hard truths about his wife and son. He looked smaller than I remembered, almost weighed down by the shame of their actions. "Excuse me," I told the group politely before walking toward him. "Jacqueline," Nathan said softly, his eyes roaming the hall filled with gleaming cars. "This is incredible. I had no idea." I gave him a genuine smile. "Would you like a tour?" He nodded, and together we walked through the collection. Unlike Julie, who had never cared to understand my work, Nathan asked thoughtful questions. He wanted to know about the engines, the paint choices, even the hours of sanding required for each body panel. As we stopped in front of the Mustang, his expression grew wistful. "You know," he said, "I used to restore old radios when I was younger. Nothing like this, of course, but I know the satisfaction of bringing something back to life." "Why did you stop?" I asked gently. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Julie thought it wasn't sophisticated enough for our social circle. She said it made us look common." His voice carried the weight of years of dreams set aside, passions buried for the sake of appearances. Like mother, like son, I thought. Harold had inherited that same disdain for genuine work and craftsmanship. "It's never too late to start again," I told him. "We actually run a small restoration workshop here at the Museum for Kids. They work on old mechanical toys, learn basic tools. We could use another instructor." The look that crossed his face was one I hadn't expected. Hope. Real, shining hope. At that moment, Peter appeared with 2 coffee cups. He smiled, handing one to me. "Thought I'd find you here." I sipped the warm drink, glancing at Nathan's brighter expression and at the rows of cars gleaming under the lights. For the first time, I felt like the past had finally been set right, and that maybe, just maybe, something good had grown from all the pain. "Hi, Dad. Your wife just offered me a teaching position," Nathan said, his voice light but full of wonder as his eyes roamed across the shining cars. Peter chuckled, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You should take it. Better than rattling around that big house all by yourself while Mom's busy with her community service." I couldn't help smiling at that. Julie's sentence included a heavy dose of community service hours at a local automotive vocational school. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had mocked my passion for years, and now she was required to spend her time surrounded by people who worked with grease and engines every day. Poetic justice, if ever there was any. As we stood there, my attention was drawn to a girl no older than 12. She was pressed up against the Corvette's window, her small hands leaving smudges on the glass as she peered inside with wide, excited eyes. Her mother tugged gently at her arm, whispering an apology to me. "Sorry about the fingerprints." "It's okay," I said warmly, walking over. I crouched slightly to meet the girl's eager gaze. "Would you like to see inside?" Her face lit up as though I had just handed her the keys to a kingdom. "Really? Really?" I said, opening the car door for her. "I'm Jacqueline, and this is my car." "Well," I corrected with a smile, "it belongs to the museum now, but I restored it." "You fixed it?" she asked, her voice full of awe as she carefully slid into the driver's seat. "By myself, mostly," I explained. "Sometimes you need help with the heavy lifting, but yes, I did most of the work on my own." Her mother watched with curiosity, her eyes soft. She's always taking things apart at home, trying to fix them. I never know whether I should encourage it or not. For a moment, I thought of Julie, how many times she had dismissed interests or talents that didn't fit into her narrow view of what was acceptable. I thought of the countless drinks she had waved away as unsuitable and the way she had tried to make me feel small. "Encourage it," I said firmly, handing the mother one of my business cards. "We have youth workshops here every Sunday." She'd fit right in. The girl's smile as she touched the steering wheel made my chest feel lighter. Maybe that was what all of this was about, passing on the passion, the craft, and the joy of bringing something back to life. Later that evening, Peter and I locked up the museum together. The halls were quiet, the cars sitting under the soft glow of the lights. I paused, letting my eyes rest on them one more time. They looked different here, more prestigious, more honored, but they were still mine in the ways that mattered most. "Penny for your thoughts?" Peter asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Just thinking about how things work out," I said softly. "Your mom tried to take all of this away from me, but instead, she handed me a bigger stage, a chance to inspire kids like that girl today." "And Dad," Peter added with a small smile. I haven't seen him this excited about anything in years. I leaned into him, my heart full. For the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should. I turned to Peter with a smile I couldn't hide. "You know what the best part is?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Julie's community service starts next week," I said, my grin widening. "Wait until she finds out she'll be assisting in my youth workshop program." Peter stopped in his tracks and let out a laugh that echoed through the museum's quiet halls. "You didn't." "I did," I replied with satisfaction. "She's always lecturing about the importance of family, always insisting she knows what's best. Well, now she gets to stand beside her father-in-law and help teach kids about restoration work. If she wants to talk about family values, she can finally live them." Peter shook his head, still laughing. "That's brilliant. Honestly, I can't think of a more fitting outcome." We walked toward the car hand in hand, the evening air cool against our faces as we stepped out of the museum. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. Julie had tried to destroy what I loved. She had broken into my garage, tried to sell my cars, and dismissed my work as if it were nothing. For so long, her words had stung. Her disapproval had lingered like a shadow. But now, the tables had turned. As I glanced back at the glowing museum building, I thought about how much had changed. The cars I once kept tucked away in my garage now stood under bright lights where thousands of people could admire them. Children came to the workshops to learn about engines, tools, and patience, skills that went far beyond mechanics. Nathan, my father-in-law, had rediscovered his own passion for fixing and teaching. Even Peter had started joining in, helping with projects and encouraging the kids. And then there was Julie. For once in her life, she would have no control, no carefully polished social image to hide behind. She would stand in a workshop, sleeves rolled up, helping children handle wrenches and paintbrushes. Maybe she would hate it, or maybe, just maybe, she would learn something about the value of real work and the joy of creating instead of tearing down. Either way, it was poetic justice. I squeezed Peter's hand as we reached our car. "You know," I said softly, "sometimes the best revenge isn't about striking back or getting even. It's about building something better out of the wreckage of someone else's mistakes." He looked at me with pride in his eyes. "And that's exactly what you've done." Julie had tried to tear down everything I'd built. She thought she could reduce my life's work to a quick sale, just to save Harold from his endless failures. But instead, she had unintentionally given me a chance to create something far more meaningful. That was worth more than all the vintage cars in the world.